The dashboard clock read 9:47 p.m. when Nicole Harris saw the red and blue lights flash in her rearview mirror. Her heart rate stayed calm, prosecutor instincts kicking in immediately. She signaled, pulled onto the empty highway shoulder, and placed both hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2. 6 months investigating this department for execution-style shootings, and now she was about to meet Sergeant Derek Collins face to face. Heavy boots crunched gravel as Collins approached, hand already resting on his holstered weapon. License and registration, now. His tone carried 20 years of unchecked authority. Nicole kept her voice measured, professional. "Officer, may I ask why I was pulled over? I wasn't speeding, and my vehicle—" "You're in no position to ask questions." Collins leaned into her window, breath hot with barely contained aggression. "Documents, now, or step out of the vehicle." "I have the right to know the reason for this stop, Officer Collins." Nicole noted his name badge, her prosecutor mind already cataloguing every detail, his jaw clenched. "Step out of the car." Nicole moved her hand slowly toward her seatbelt buckle. "I'm going to unbuckle my seatbelt and step out as requested." "Hands where I can see them!" Collins' weapon cleared his holster in a practiced motion, barrel aimed directly at her head. Nicole froze, palms flat against the steering wheel. Her smartwatch recorded every word, every second. "Officer, my phone is in my jacket pocket. I'm going to reach for it slowly to call my attorney. I'm moving my right hand—" "Gun, gun!" Collins screamed. 4 shots exploded through the night air in rapid succession. Glass shattered, metal tore. Nicole's driver's side door erupted in a constellation of bullet holes as she dropped, hitting the asphalt hard. Blood spread dark across her grey workout jacket. Silence fell like a guillotine. Then her voice cut through, weak but razor-sharp with fury. "You just shot a state prosecutor, Sergeant Collins, badge number 4739. I suggest you call your union rep immediately, because everything you just did. I've been investigating you for 6 months, and my smartwatch recorded every single word." Collins' face drained white as Ryan Mitchell's radio clattered to the pavement. "If you believe that no one should ever be shot during a traffic stop for asking questions, type justice below. Then comment your country and city. Let's see where people stand against police brutality worldwide. Your participation shows that accountability knows no borders." The scene froze on Collins's expression, pure panic replacing his earlier arrogance. His hands trembled as the reality crashed down on him. He'd just attempted to execute the one person in the entire state who had the power, evidence, and determination to destroy everything he'd built over 2 decades of corrupted authority. 8 hours earlier, Nicole had stood in the district courthouse presenting evidence in a routine drug case. Her senior colleagues had no idea that she'd spent every evening for the past 6 months reviewing cold case files, incident reports that never quite added up, and dashcam footage that mysteriously disappeared. The pattern was undeniable. 3 officer-involved shootings in 2 years, all involving Sergeant Derek Collins, all victims black, all ruled justified. She'd requested the federal investigation quietly, working with FBI Civil Rights Division to build an airtight case. The smartwatch recording feature wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. She'd studied Collins's pattern thoroughly enough to know that someday, somehow, their paths would cross. She just hadn't expected it to be tonight, alone on a dark highway, dressed in gym clothes with no backup. Collins stared at her bleeding form on the asphalt, his mind racing through every lie he'd told, every report he'd falsified, every witness he'd intimidated. The woman at his feet wasn't some random traffic stop gone wrong. She was the prosecutor who'd been quietly building the case that would end his career, his pension, his freedom. Ryan Mitchell stood frozen by the patrol car, his young face pale in the flashing lights. 23 years old, fresh out of the academy, and he'd just witnessed his training officer attempt murder. The dash cam was recording, the body cam was recording, and now he had to make a choice that would define the rest of his life. The wail of approaching sirens cut through the night as Ryan Mitchell's hands shook on his radio. "Dispatch. This is Unit 7, Adam 12. Officer-involved shooting. We need an ambulance now. Highway 95, mile marker 47. Collins grabbed Ryan's shoulder hard enough to bruise. "Listen to me very carefully, Mitchell. She reached for something. I had no choice. You saw it, right? You saw her reach? Ryan looked at Nicole on the ground, blood pooling beneath her, eyes still open and watching everything. Then he looked at Collins, the sergeant who'd been his training officer for 6 months, who'd taught him shortcuts and procedures that never quite matched what they'd learned at the academy. Ryan's voice cracked. You saw her reach for a weapon. Collins' grip tightened. That's what you saw. That's what you're going to tell them. Understand? Nicole's voice cut through, weak but clear. Officer Mitchell, badge 9247. Everything you say right now is being recorded, not just by my smartwatch. The dash cam in your patrol car captured everything. Every word Sergeant Collins just said to you is now evidence of witness tampering and obstruction of justice. Collins' face twisted with rage. He took a step toward Nicole, but Ryan moved between them instinctively. Sarge, the ambulance is coming. We need to secure the scene. Get out of my way, Mitchell. I can't let you approach her again, sir. Ryan's hand moved to his own weapon, not drawing it but making his intention clear. She's right about the dash cam. Everything's recorded. The moment stretched between them like a wire pulled taut. Then the ambulance screamed around the corner. Lights painting the highway in red and white, and Collins had to step back, had to become the concerned officer rather than the desperate criminal. Paramedics rushed to Nicole, their practiced hands assessing wounds, starting IVs, loading her onto the gurney. One of them, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes, leaned close as they worked. Ma'am, can you tell me your name? Nicole Harris. State Prosecutor. Each word cost her. Blood loss making the world swim. 4 gunshot wounds. Officer Collins, badge 4739, fired without provocation during traffic stop. No weapon in vehicle. I was complying with all commands when he opened fire. The paramedic's eyes widened, but she kept working, kept documenting. I've got you, ma'am. We're taking you to Metro General. You're going to be okay. As they loaded Nicole into the ambulance, more patrol cars arrived. Captain James Rodriguez stepped out of an unmarked sedan, his face grave. He'd been a cop for 25 years, and he knew what a career-ending incident looked like. This was worse. This was department-ending. Collins, Mitchell, what happened here? Rodriguez's voice carried authority that made even Collins straighten. Captain, I executed a traffic stop for erratic driving. The driver became combative, refused to comply with lawful orders, and reached for what I believed to be a weapon. I fired in self-defense, following all protocols. Her name is Nicole Harris, Ryan interrupted, his voice stronger now. She's a state prosecutor. She asked why she was being stopped, and Sergeant Collins ordered her out of the vehicle without providing justification. She was reaching for her phone when he fired. 4 shots. She never had a weapon, Captain. I checked the vehicle. There's nothing. Rodriguez closed his eyes briefly. 25 years of service, and it was going to end like this. Collins, give me your weapon and your badge. Now, Captain, you can't possibly... Your weapon and your badge, that's an order, Sergeant. Collins's face went from pale to red. You're going to take the word of some rookie over mine? I've got 20 years. And she's got a recording of everything you just said and did. Rodriguez held out his hand. Your career is over. The only question now is whether you're going to make it worse by refusing a direct order. The standoff lasted 10 seconds that felt like an eternity. Then Collins unholstered his weapon, ejected the magazine, cleared the chamber, and slammed both into Rodriguez's hand. The badge followed, thrown rather than handed over. This is a setup, Collins hissed. She's been investigating me, Captain. She targeted me. This whole thing is entrapment. Then you'll have your day in court to explain that. Rodriguez turned to Ryan. Mitchell, you're going to give a full statement. Everything you saw, everything you heard. Do you understand? Ryan nodded, relief flooding through him. Yes, sir, everything. As Collins was led to a patrol car, not arrested yet, but clearly not free to leave, Ryan pulled out his phone. He'd uploaded the dashcam footage to a secure cloud server 3 minutes after the shooting, something Nicole had told him to do during a training seminar 6 months ago, back when he thought he was joining a department that valued integrity. She'd known. Somehow she'd known this moment would come. What Derek didn't know was that Nicole had been recording audio on her smartwatch from the moment she was pulled over. Every word, every lie, every moment of his panic when he realized what he'd done. But that recording was only the beginning of the evidence that would destroy him. Dr. Patricia Chen had been an emergency room physician for 15 years. And she'd learned to read bullet wounds the way other people read books. The 4 entry wounds on Nicole Harris told a story that made her blood run cold. "Center mass, all 4 shots," she told her surgical team as they prepped. "This wasn't warning fire. This wasn't panic shooting. This was execution style. Somebody trained this officer very well, just not in the right things." Nicole drifted in and out of consciousness as they worked, but when she was awake, she was sharp. "Dr. Chen, I need you to document everything in detail. Trajectory, powder burns, distance. This is evidence." "Ma'am, you need to save your strength. I'm a state prosecutor." Nicole's hand grabbed Chen's wrist with surprising strength. "I've spent 6 months investigating officer-involved shootings that looked just like this. 3 deaths, all ruled justified. I need your medical documentation to prove this was attempted murder, not self-defense." Chen looked into Nicole's eyes and saw something that changed everything. Not fear, but fury. Controlled, professional fury. "I'll document everything, I promise." The surgery took 4 hours. 2 bullets had lodged in non-critical tissue and were removed easily. The 3rd had grazed a rib, causing significant bleeding but missing vital organs by millimeters. The 4th had passed clean through her shoulder, missing the brachial artery by less than an inch. "She's incredibly lucky," Chen told her team. 4 shots fired at close range. And she's going to survive. Someone was watching over her tonight. While Nicole was in surgery, Captain Rodriguez sat in the ER waiting room, reviewing the dashcam footage on his tablet for the 3rd time. Each viewing made it worse. Colin's approach was textbook aggression from the start. No professional courtesy, no de-escalation attempt, weapon drawn at the slightest provocation. And then there was the audio. His own officer had tried to intimidate a state prosecutor into silence, while she bled on the asphalt. Rodriguez had known Collins for 15 years, had written recommendation letters for his promotions, had backed him through 3 previous shooting investigations. God help him, he'd been part of the problem. His phone buzzed. FBI. Rodriguez's hand trembled as he answered. "Captain Rodriguez." "Captain, this is Special Agent Marcus Johnson, FBI Civil Rights Division. I understand you have an officer-involved shooting with Prosecutor Nicole Harris as the victim." "How did you—" "Because Prosecutor Harris has been working with us for 6 months, building a civil rights case against your department, specifically focusing on Sergeant Derek Collins and his pattern of racially motivated violence. This shooting, she predicted it. Not the specifics, but the eventuality. She knew Collins would escalate to lethal force when confronted by someone who knew his history. Rodriguez felt his world tilt. She was investigating us. She was trying to prevent more deaths." Johnson's voice was hard. 3 families buried their sons because Collins sees a black face and decides whether that person lives or dies based on his mood. Ms. Harris was building the case to stop him before there was a 4th. Instead, she became the 4th target. Except she survived. And now every piece of evidence she's been collecting, every pattern she's documented, every interview she's conducted, all of it is going to come out in federal court. "Agent Johnson, I didn't know—" "That's the problem, Captain. You should have known. 3 shootings in 2 years, all the same officer, all black victims, all ruled justified. You didn't ask questions because you didn't want answers." The call ended, leaving Rodriguez staring at his reflection in the tablet screen. 25 years of service, and he'd become the exact thing he'd sworn to prevent. A cop who looked the other way when his brothers in blue crossed the line. Dr. Chen emerged from the surgical suite, still in her scrubs, blood spattered but face calm. "She's stable. The surgery went well. She'll make a full recovery, though she's going to be in significant pain for several weeks." "When can I speak with her?" Rodriguez needed to apologize, to explain, to somehow make this right even though he knew nothing could. "Not tonight. She's in recovery, sedated. But Captain—" Chen's expression hardened. "I've documented everything. The wound patterns, the trajectories, the forensic evidence. When she wakes up and asks for my report, I'm going to tell her the truth. Those shots were meant to kill. And whoever fired them should never carry a badge again. Rodriguez nodded slowly. He won't. I'll make sure of that. See that you do. Chen turned back toward the surgical wing, then paused. You know what she said before we put her under. She said, "Tell them I forgive nothing, but I'll use everything." What does that mean? It means, Rodriguez said quietly, that Derek Collins just made the worst mistake of his life, and he's about to learn that Nicole Harris doesn't just prosecute cases, she dismantles systems. In the recovery room, Nicole's eyes fluttered open briefly, her hand moving to touch the bandages across her chest and shoulder. The pain was distant, held at bay by medication, but the clarity in her mind was sharp as broken glass. She'd spent 6 months building the case against Collins from the outside. Now she had the ultimate piece of evidence, her own body, marked with his guilt. 4 bullets that should have ended her life had instead given her the platform to end his career and reform the department that had protected him. Collins thought he'd silenced her with gunfire. He had no idea he'd just given her the megaphone that would echo across the entire nation. While Nicole was in surgery fighting for her life, Derek Collins was in his precinct, destroying evidence he thought would save his career. He had no idea that the FBI had been monitoring his communications for months, and every deleted file, every erased video, was being captured in real time by federal servers. Special Agent Marcus Johnson arrived at Metro General Hospital at 4:17 a.m., 6 hours after the shooting. He'd been coordinating with Nicole Harris for half a year, and tonight's events had accelerated their timeline by months. The careful, methodical case they'd been building was about to become a federal firestorm. Ryan Mitchell sat in the hospital corridor, still in uniform, giving his third statement. This one was for the FBI, and unlike his statement to Internal Affairs, he was holding nothing back. Sergeant Collins made racist comments before pulling over Ms. Harris, Ryan said, his voice steady now that he'd committed to the truth. He said, "There's another one thinking she's above the law." I didn't understand what he meant until we approached the vehicle, and he saw she was black. Then his entire demeanor changed, aggressive, hostile, looking for a reason to escalate. Johnson typed notes on his tablet. "Did you attempt to de-escalate?" "I tried. I stayed back, hoping he'd calm down, but Collins doesn't de-escalate. He dominates. That's what he taught me. That every interaction with the public is about establishing authority, making them submit." Ryan's hands clenched. "I believed him. I thought that was good policing. Now I know I was being trained to be part of a system that kills people." "You made the right choice tonight, Officer Mitchell. You chose truth over loyalty to a corrupt system." "I chose too late." Ryan's voice broke. "She got shot because I didn't intervene sooner. I could have. You testified truthfully. You preserved evidence. You refused to participate in witness tampering. That takes courage, officer." Johnson closed his tablet. "We're going to need you to testify about everything Collins taught you, every shortcut, every violation of protocol. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir. Whatever it takes." While Johnson interviewed Ryan, forensic teams were executing search warrants. Collins' personal phone, his work computer, his home office, all seized. The digital forensics team worked through the night, recovering deleted files, text messages, emails that painted a picture of systemic corruption. At 5:43 a.m., they found the smoking gun. "Agent Johnson?" The tech analyst's voice carried excitement and horror in equal measure. "You need to see this. Collins has been running a private signal chat with 6 other officers called Real Police Work. They've been sharing photos of arrests, making racist jokes, celebrating violent encounters. And, sir, 3 of the officers in that chat were first responders to Collins's previous shooting incidents. They helped him falsify reports." Johnson felt cold rage settle in his chest. "Send everything to my secure server. Then contact the U.S. Attorney's Office. We're going to need a grand jury, and we're going to need it fast." The evidence multiplied exponentially. Body cam footage from Collins' previous incidents showed patterns of aggression, escalation without cause, excessive force. Dashcam recordings captured audio of racist slurs, threats, intimidation tactics. Internal Affairs complaints that had been mysteriously closed were reopened, Witnesses who'd been afraid to speak found courage. By 7:00 a.m., the scope of the investigation had expanded from one bad officer to an entire corrupt unit. Captain Rodriguez, watching the evidence pile up in the FBI's mobile command center, felt sick. He'd signed off on use of force reviews. He'd approved the justified shooting determinations. His name was on the paperwork that had protected Collins for years. "Captain Rodriguez, we need to discuss your role in this." Johnson's tone was professional but cold. "You supervised Collins for 8 years. You approved 3 shooting investigations that our experts now say were clearly unjustified. Were you part of the cover-up or just incompetent?" Rodriguez met his eyes. "I trusted my officers. I believed their reports. I didn't ask hard questions because I didn't want to believe the answer. That makes me guilty, Agent Johnson. Maybe not criminally, but morally? Absolutely. Honesty's a start." Johnson gestured to a chair. "Sit down. We need to know everything. Who else was involved? How deep this goes? What evidence might have been destroyed before tonight?" The interrogation lasted 4 hours. Rodriguez provided names, dates, incident reports that never felt quite right, complaints that disappeared, witnesses who stopped cooperating after visits from Collins' friends. By the time they finished, Johnson had enough to expand the investigation to include the entire precinct command structure. At noon, Nicole woke in her hospital bed, groggy from anesthesia, but mind-clearing rapidly. Agent Johnson sat beside her, along with Dr. Chen and a federal prosecutor named Sarah Williams. "How bad?" Nicole's voice was rough from the breathing tube. 4 gunshot wounds. "All survivable. You're going to be fine." Chen squeezed her hand. "But Nicole, the forensic evidence supports everything you predicted. This wasn't defensive shooting. This was attempted execution." Nicole closed her eyes, not in relief, but in vindication. "Tell me you got everything." "Everything," Johnson confirmed. "The dash cam, your smartwatch recording, Officer Mitchell's testimony, Collins' phone with the racist chat group, deleted bodycam footage we recovered from cloud backups. We've got him cold. And we've got at least 6 other officers who were part of the cover-up network." Sarah Williams leaned forward. "Nicole, I'm taking over your caseload. You're now the victim in this case, not the prosecutor. But everything you built over the past 6 months, it's solid. We're bringing federal charges against Collins for civil rights violations, attempted murder, and obstruction of justice. The district attorney is bringing state charges, and the families of the 3 previous victims are filing civil suits. Collins is going to spend the rest of his life in court, and then in prison." "What about the department?" Nicole's question cut to the heart of it. She'd never been interested in just punishing Collins. She wanted to dismantle the system that created and protected him. "The Department of Justice is opening a pattern and practice investigation," Johnson said. "Everything you documented, the training failures, the supervision gaps, the complaint system that protects bad cops, all of it is going into the federal review. This department is going to be rebuilt from the ground up, or it's going to be placed under federal oversight until it proves it can police itself properly." Nicole smiled, though it hurt. "Good, that's what I wanted. Not revenge, reform." "You're going to get both," Sarah promised. "Collins goes to prison and the system that enabled him gets dismantled. That's justice." Derek thought deleting the bodycam footage would protect him. What he didn't know was that Ryan Mitchell had already uploaded a copy to Nicole's encrypted server before Derek even asked him to erase it. Every second of the shooting, every word of the attempted cover-up, preserved forever in digital clarity. The smartwatch recording was released to the public at 2:00 p.m., 12 hours after the shooting. The FBI had wanted to keep it as evidence, but Nicole insisted the public needed to hear Collins's voice, needed to understand exactly what had happened on that dark highway. The audio file went viral within minutes. Nicole's calm voice. "Officer, may I ask why I was pulled over?" Collins, aggressive. "You're in no position to ask questions." The escalation was rapid, captured in crystalline clarity. Every command, every threat, Nicole's measured compliance, Collins' growing aggression. Then the moment that made the nation hold its breath. "Nicole." "Officer, my phone is in my jacket pocket. I'm going to reach for it slowly to call my attorney. Collins, gun, gun! 4 shots, glass breaking. Nicole's gasp of pain, then silence. Then her voice, weak but absolutely clear. You just shot a state prosecutor, Sergeant Collins. Badge number 4739. I suggest you call your union rep immediately. Because everything you just did? I've been investigating you for 6 months, and my smartwatch recorded every single word. But the audio didn't stop there. It kept recording through the aftermath. Collins trying to intimidate Ryan Mitchell. Ryan's refusal to lie. Captain Rodriguez arriving and immediately realizing the scope of the disaster. Every word, every threat, every moment of Collins realizing his career was over. The final 30 seconds were the most damning. Collins, unaware the watch was still recording, speaking to another officer. She didn't act scared enough. People like her need to show respect. Maybe getting shot will teach her some humility. Those words, people like her, became the most quoted phrase of the year. Within hours, protests began outside the precinct. Not violent demonstrations, but thousands of people holding signs, chanting Nicole's name, demanding accountability. The police union issued a statement defending Collins, claiming he'd followed protocol and feared for his life. The backlash was instantaneous and furious. 3 major news networks requested interviews with Nicole. She declined all of them from her hospital bed. I'm not interested in being the story, she told Sarah Williams. The story is the pattern. Collins isn't unique. He's the product of a system that trains officers to see certain citizens as threats by default. That's what needs to change. But the media didn't need her cooperation. They found the families of Collins' 3 previous victims. Marcus Thompson, 24, shot during a traffic stop. Darius Williams, 31, shot in his own driveway. Jamal Henderson, 19, shot outside a convenience store. All ruled justified, all eerily similar to what happened to Nicole. Marcus Thompson's mother, Gloria, spoke at a press conference. They told me my son reached for something. They said the officer had no choice. I believed them because officers don't lie, right? But then I heard that recording of what they did to Prosecutor Harris and I realized they lied about my boy too. He didn't reach for anything. He was executed for being black and asking questions. The press conference became a watershed moment. 3 grieving families, united in their loss, demanding the truth. And standing behind them, via video call from her hospital bed, was Nicole Harris. I'm sorry I couldn't save your sons, Nicole said, her voice carrying despite the pain. I was investigating Collins because I suspected he was responsible for their deaths. I wasn't fast enough. I wasn't thorough enough. And because of that, 3 young men died, and you had to bury your children without justice. But I promise you this, we will get justice now. For Marcus, for Darius, for Jamal. And we will make sure no other mother has to bury a son, because an officer decided black skin was a threat. The families wept. The nation watched. And Derek Collins, sitting in his attorney's office, realized that public opinion had turned against him so completely that even his union was quietly backing away. His lawyer, a man named Richard Foster, who'd defended dozens of officers successfully, was brutally honest. Derek, the smartwatch recording is devastating. Your words about people like her needing to show respect. That's going to play to a jury, and they're going to hear racism, not officer safety. The families of your previous victims are reopening their cases with new attorneys. The FBI has your phone records showing the racist chat group. And Officer Mitchell is going to testify against you. Mitchell's a rookie, no one will believe. They'll believe him because the evidence backs him up. Foster slammed his hand on the desk. You shot an unarmed prosecutor 4 times while she was complying with your commands, and you did it because she had the audacity to ask why she was being stopped. That's not police work, Derek. That's attempted murder. Collins' face hardened. I was following my training. I perceived a threat. Your training didn't tell you to escalate a routine traffic stop into a shooting. Your training didn't tell you to see a black woman asking questions as a threat requiring lethal force. Your training didn't tell you to delete body cam footage and intimidate witnesses. Foster leaned back. Your training might have been flawed, Derek, but you're the one who pulled the trigger 4 times. That's on you, not the department. Meanwhile, forensic analysis of the shooting revealed more damaging evidence. The bullet trajectories showed Collins had been standing beside Nicole's door, not in fear behind cover. The grouping of the shots, all center mass, indicated careful aim, not panic fire. The lack of Nicole's fingerprints on anything except her steering wheel and seatbelt proved she'd never reached for a weapon or made any threatening movement. Dr. Chen's medical report was equally damning. The powder burns indicated Collins had been close enough to see Nicole's empty hands clearly. The wound angles showed she'd been sitting normally in her seat, not lunging or making aggressive movements. The fourth shot, the one that had passed through her shoulder, had been fired as she was falling, already hit by the first three. "He kept shooting," Chen told the federal investigators, "even after she was down, even after the threat, if there ever was one, was neutralized. That's not self-defense, that's execution." By evening, new evidence emerged from the most unexpected source: security camera footage from a business a quarter-mile down the highway. The long-range camera had captured Collins' patrol car following Nicole's vehicle for 3 full miles before activating his lights, staying precisely 10 feet behind her, clearly waiting for any minor infraction to justify a stop. He was hunting, Agent Johnson told his team. He picked her out, followed her, waited for any excuse to pull her over. This wasn't a random traffic stop. This was targeted harassment that escalated to attempted murder. The evidence was overwhelming, and with each new piece, Collins's chances of anything resembling a favorable outcome disappeared like smoke. The audio from Nicole's smartwatch didn't just prove Derek lied. It proved something far worse. He'd been planning to escalate the encounter from the moment he saw her face. The security footage showed him following her for 3 miles, waiting, hunting. And the nation was about to learn that Nicole Harris wasn't his first target. She was just the first to survive. 3 days after the shooting, Nicole Harris checked herself out of the hospital against medical advice. She walked into the federal building with her arm in a sling, bullet wounds still healing, and took her place not as victim, but as witness. The grand jury was already in session, and Sarah Williams had built a case so thorough that indictments were inevitable. But Nicole wanted to testify. She needed to look the jury in the eyes and explain not just what happened to her, but what had been happening in her city for years. "State your name for the record," the federal prosecutor requested. "Nicole Marie Harris, State Prosecutor, Civil Rights Division." "Ms. Harris, can you explain to the jury why you were investigating Sergeant Derek Collins?" Nicole took a breath, and the room fell silent. "6 months ago, I was reviewing closed case files for a completely unrelated matter. I noticed a pattern: 3 officer-involved shootings over 24 months, all involving the same sergeant, all ruled justified, all victims African-American males between 18 and 35. The statistical probability of one officer being involved in 3 fatal encounters with the same demographic in such a short period was concerning enough to warrant deeper investigation." She walked the jury through each case methodically. Marcus Thompson, pulled over for a broken taillight, shot when he reached toward his waistband. Except the dashcam showed his hands on the steering wheel until the moment Collins fired. Darius Williams, approached in his own driveway, shot when he made a threatening movement. Except the bodycam showed him standing still, confused, asking why police were on his property. Jamal Henderson, outside a convenience store, shot when he refused to comply with commands. Except witness statements said he was complying, hands visible, begging not to be shot. In each case, Nicole continued, the investigating officer was Captain James Rodriguez. In each case, the witness statements that contradicted the officer's narrative were dismissed or ignored. In each case, video evidence that might have challenged the justified shooting determination mysteriously experienced technical failures or was deemed inconclusive. What did you conclude from this pattern? That Sergeant Collins was executing young black men under color of law, and that the department was systematically covering up his crimes. The grand jury members shifted in their seats, uncomfortable but riveted. Ms. Harris, knowing what you knew about Sergeant Collins' pattern, why did you allow yourself to be in a vulnerable position during a traffic stop? Nicole's smile was bitter. I didn't allow anything, sir. I was driving home from the gym when Collins decided to pull me over. I had no choice in the encounter, but yes, I was prepared. I activated my smartwatch recording. I documented every command, every response, every escalation. I did everything correctly. Hands visible, voice calm, movements announced. I complied with every lawful order and questioned only those commands that lacked legal justification. And despite that compliance, he shot you 4 times. Yes, because I asked questions, because I knew my rights, because I didn't show what Sergeant Collins called respect. Nicole's voice hardened. In his mind, respect means submission. It means accepting any command without question, no matter how unconstitutional. It means allowing officers to violate your rights, because asking why is perceived as a threat. Sarah Williams introduced the smartwatch audio. The grand jury listened in shocked silence, as Collins' voice escalated from aggressive to lethal in under 90 seconds. Then they played the footage recovered from Collins' phone. The signal chat called "Real Police Work." 8 officers sharing photos of arrests, some showing excessive force, messages celebrating attitude adjustments and teaching respect, racist jokes, plans to cover for each other's use of force incidents. One message from Collins, sent 2 weeks before he shot Nicole. Another uppity prosecutor asking questions about the Thompson shooting. Need to teach these people their place. Anyone got experience making complaints disappear? The response from another officer, Rodriguez handles that. He's got the captain's bars. He can close anything. Just make sure your paperwork is solid and the story doesn't change. The grand jury heard testimony from Ryan Mitchell, who described the racist comment Collins made before pulling Nicole over. They heard from Dr. Chen, who explained how the wound patterns indicated execution-style shooting, not defensive fire. They heard from forensic experts, who proved Collins had deleted body cam footage and attempted to destroy evidence. But the most powerful testimony came from someone unexpected. Collins' ex-wife, Jennifer Collins, who'd divorced him 3 years earlier after 15 years of marriage. Derek always talked about them, Jennifer testified, her voice shaking. He never used names. It was always them or those people or the ones who think they're better than us. I knew he meant black people, but I told myself it was just talk, just stress from the job. I didn't want to believe I'd married a racist. Did his attitude ever manifest in his work? He celebrated shootings. Jennifer wiped tears. When Marcus Thompson died, Derek came home and opened a beer. He said, "One less thug on the streets." When I asked what happened, he laughed and said the kid thought he could argue with a police officer and found out different. He was proud of it. Proud. Did you report this to anyone? Who would I tell? His captain was his friend. His fellow officers protected him. I was just the wife who didn't understand police work. Jennifer's voice broke. I divorced him because I couldn't live with what he was becoming, or maybe what he'd always been and I was too blind to see. The grand jury deliberated for 47 minutes. The indictment came back with 17 charges, 4 counts of attempted murder, 3 counts of civil rights violations related to Nicole's shooting, obstruction of justice, witness tampering, destroying evidence, and 7 additional civil rights violations related to his previous victims' deaths. Captain Rodriguez was indicted separately for obstruction of justice and conspiracy to violate civil rights. 6 other officers from the Signal chat group faced charges ranging from conspiracy to falsifying police reports. The police union held a press conference condemning the indictments as politically motivated persecution of officers doing their jobs in difficult circumstances. The press conference lasted 8 minutes before protesters outside began chanting the names of Collins' victims so loudly the union president couldn't continue. That evening, Nicole appeared on national television for the first time. Not to discuss her case, but to announce something bigger. "I'm establishing the Officer Accountability Project," she told the cameras, her arm still in a sling, bandages visible beneath her professional blazer. "We're creating a national database of officer-involved shootings, use of force complaints and civil rights violations. Every jurisdiction, every department. Searchable by officer name and badge number. Because Derek Collins wasn't an isolated incident. He was a pattern that should have been stopped years ago, and there are hundreds more like him in departments across this country." The announcement was met with immediate opposition from police unions and fierce support from civil rights organizations. Within 24 hours, The database had received over 10 Houses errant incident reports from citizens across the nation. Nicole had turned her shooting from a personal tragedy into a national movement. Meanwhile, Collins sat in his attorney's office, watching the news coverage with growing horror. His face was everywhere. His voice from the smartwatch recording was being analyzed by linguists who confirmed the racial undertones in his word choices. His text messages were being read on air, his racism displayed for the world to judge. "We need to negotiate a plea," Richard Foster said. "The evidence is overwhelming, Derek. If we go to trial, you're looking at life in prison. But if we negotiate now, maybe we can get it down to 20 years, possibility of parole." "I'm not pleading guilty to anything," Collins snarled. "I was doing my job." She was combative, non-compliant. She asked why she was being stopped. That's not combative, that's constitutional. Foster threw his pen across the desk. "You shot an unarmed prosecutor 4 times because she hurt your ego. That's not police work. That's murder. And a jury is going to convict you of murder because we have video, audio forensics, and your own racist text messages proving intent." Collins stood, knocking his chair backward. "Find me a lawyer who believes in backing the blue. You're fired." Foster watched him storm out, then quietly called the prosecutor's office. "Sarah, Richard Foster, Collins just fired me. He's going to trial with some pro-cop attorney who'll let him testify. I thought you'd want to know." Sarah Williams smiled. "Thank you, Richard. I was hoping he'd be that stupid." Because Derek Collins on the witness stand, trying to explain away his racism and his violence, would be the prosecution's greatest gift. They wouldn't have to destroy him. He'd destroy himself. 6 months after the shooting, on a cold morning in February, the trial of Derek Collins began. The courthouse was surrounded by protesters on both sides, families of police shooting victims holding photos of the dead, and thin blue line supporters holding signs declaring "We back our officers." Nicole Harris sat in the front row of the courtroom, her arm finally out of the sling, but still favoring her right side where the bullets had torn through muscle and bone. She'd spent 6 months preparing for this moment, working with Sarah Williams to build a case so airtight that even Collins' new attorney, a former police officer turned lawyer named David Burke, was struggling to find defenses. The jury selection had taken 3 weeks. 12 citizens, carefully screened for bias, 6 who'd had positive encounters with police, and 6 who'd experienced negative ones, a balance that both sides had reluctantly agreed upon. Judge Patricia Morrison, a black woman with 30 years on the bench and a reputation for running a tight courtroom, looked at both tables. "Mr. Burke, is your client ready to proceed?" Collins stood, wearing a suit instead of his uniform, looking smaller somehow without the badge and gun. "Yes, Your Honor." "Ms. Williams, is the prosecution ready?" "We are, Your Honor." Sarah stood, and beside her stood Nicole Harris. "Your Honor, I'd like to note for the record that Prosecutor Harris will be sitting at the prosecution table throughout this trial. She's both victim and attorney. And while she won't be questioning witnesses, her expertise in civil rights law has been invaluable to building this case." Judge Morrison nodded. "Noted. Mr. Burke, any objection?" Burke stood. "No objection, Your Honor, though I'd like to remind the court that Ms. Harris's presence at the prosecution table could be prejudicial to my client." "Your client shot her 4 times, Counselor." "I think the prejudice ship has sailed." Morrison's tone was dry. "Let's proceed with opening statements." Sarah Williams approached the jury, her bearing confident but not aggressive. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about a man who believed his badge gave him the right to execute anyone who didn't show him sufficient respect. Derek Collins pulled over Nicole Harris without cause, escalated a routine traffic stop into a shooting, fired 4 times at an unarmed woman who was complying with his commands, and then attempted to cover up his crime by destroying evidence and intimidating witnesses. She clicked a remote, and the courtroom screens came to life with a photo of Nicole's bullet-riddled car door. 4 holes, tight grouping, center mass. Those holes tell a story. They tell us Sergeant Collins wasn't firing in fear. He wasn't firing in self-defense. He was firing to kill. And the only reason Nicole Harris is alive to testify today is because his aim was slightly off, and her luck was slightly better than that of Marcus Thompson, Darius Williams and Jamal Henderson, 3 young black men who Collins killed in the 3 years before he tried to kill Nicole. Burke objected. Your Honor, my client has never been charged in those deaths. They're irrelevant to this case. They're pattern evidence, Your Honor, Sarah countered. They show a history of racially motivated violence that culminated in the attempted murder of Prosecutor Harris. I'll allow it, Morrison ruled. The prosecution may present pattern evidence. Objection overruled. Sarah continued, methodically laying out the timeline. Collins following Nicole's car for 3 miles before initiating the stop. His aggressive approach, his escalation, his shots, his attempted cover-up. The smartwatch recording that captured everything. You'll hear that recording, Sarah promised the jury. You'll hear Sergeant Collins' voice as he demands compliance without providing legal justification. You'll hear Nicole Harris calmly asking questions that any citizen has the constitutional right to ask. And you'll hear 4 gunshots that nearly ended her life because Derek Collins decided that a black woman asking questions was a threat that required lethal force. Burke's opening statement was predictable. Ladies and gentlemen, police officers face split-second decisions in dangerous situations. Sergeant Collins, a decorated officer with 20 years of service, perceived a threat during a routine traffic stop. Ms. Harris was non-compliant, argumentative, and made furtive movements that any trained officer would recognize as potentially dangerous. My client followed his training, assessed the threat, and took action to protect himself. He gestured toward Collins, who sat with practiced calm, hands folded. This is a man who served his community for 2 decades, a man who ran toward danger when others ran away. A man who made a difficult decision in a split second and is now being crucified for it because the person he stopped happened to be a prosecutor with a grudge against the police. Nicole's jaw clenched, but her expression remained neutral. She'd expected this defense. Paint Collins as the victim, paint her as the aggressor. It wouldn't work, not with the evidence they had. But Burke would try. The first witness was Ryan Mitchell, now wearing an FBI trainee uniform instead of a police uniform. He'd resigned from the department and been accepted into the federal law enforcement training program, a redemption arc that made him the prosecution's most sympathetic witness. Officer Mitchell, describe what you observed on the night of September 15th. Ryan took a breath. Steady now after months of therapy and preparation. Sergeant Collins and I were on routine patrol when he saw a vehicle ahead of us. He said, "There's another one thinking she's above the law." I asked what he meant, and he said, "You'll see." We followed the vehicle for approximately 3 miles. The driver wasn't speeding, wasn't driving erratically, wasn't committing any traffic violations that I could observe. Did Sergeant Collins explain why we were following this particular vehicle? No, ma'am. He just said we'd pull her over when the moment was right. What happened next? Ryan described the traffic stop in painful detail. Collins' aggressive approach, Nicole's calm questions, the escalation that made no tactical sense. I stayed back by our patrol car because Sergeant Collins told me to, but I could hear everything. Ms. Harris was compliant, polite, asking reasonable questions. Sergeant Collins was aggressive from the start, treating a simple traffic stop like a felony stop. What did you observe immediately before the shooting? Ms. Harris said she was going to reach for her phone to call her attorney. She announced her movements, just like we're trained to do when we're the ones being recorded. She moved slowly, deliberately. There was no threat, no weapon, nothing that justified lethal force. And Sergeant Collins shot her anyway. Yes, ma'am, 4 times. I heard him shout gun, but I could see from my position that there was no gun. Her hands were visible the entire time until he fired. Burke's cross-examination was aggressive. Officer Mitchell, you're now employed by the FBI, correct? I'm in the FBI training academy, yes. And that position came after you agreed to testify against Sergeant Collins, didn't it? No, sir. I applied to the FBI because I realized the police department I worked for was corrupt. My testimony is about telling the truth, not getting a job. But you benefit from that truth-telling, don't you? A federal law enforcement career instead of a city police officer? That's quite an upgrade. Ryan's voice stayed level. I testified because it was the right thing to do, Mr. Burke. If there are consequences for telling the truth, good or bad, I'll accept them. But I won't lie to protect an officer who attempted to murder an unarmed woman. The courtroom fell silent. Burke had no response to that level of conviction. Nicole wasn't just prosecuting Derek Collins anymore. She was dismantling the entire system that had protected him for 2 decades. And sitting in the courtroom's gallery, taking notes, were representatives from the Department of Justice who would use this trial as the foundation for a nationwide investigation into police civil rights violations. Dr. Patricia Chen took the stand on the 3rd day of trial. She'd reviewed Nicole's medical records dozens of times, prepared her testimony with the precision of someone who understood that medical evidence could mean the difference between conviction and acquittal. Dr. Chen, you treated Ms. Harris on the night she was shot. Can you describe her injuries? 4 gunshot wounds, 2 bullets lodged in soft tissue, 1 grazed a rib causing significant bleeding, and 1 passed through her shoulder, missing the brachial artery by less than an inch. Chen pulled up medical imaging on the courtroom screens. These images show the bullet trajectories. All 4 shots were aimed at center mass, heart, lungs, major organs. This wasn't warning fire, this was shooting to kill. In your professional opinion, if the shooter's aim had been even slightly different, would Ms. Harris have survived? No. If any of those bullets had been 2 inches to the left, she'd have died from cardiac trauma before the ambulance arrived. This was attempted murder that failed only because of millimeters. Burke tried to challenge the testimony. Dr. Chen, you're not a ballistics expert, are you? No. But I'm an emergency room physician, with 15 years of experience treating gunshot wounds. I know the difference between defensive shooting, scattered shots, fired while retreating, and execution-style shooting. These wounds indicate the shooter was stationary, aimed carefully, and fired to kill. The jury studied the medical images with expressions ranging from shock to anger. 4 bullet holes in a woman's body, each one potentially fatal, each one fired by an officer who'd sworn to protect. Next came the forensics expert, Dr. Michael Reynolds, who specialized in shooting reconstruction. He'd analyzed the scene, the bullet trajectories, the physical evidence, and built a 3D computer model of exactly what happened that night. Mr. Reynolds, can you walk the jury through your findings? The courtroom screens came alive with the 3D recreation. Nicole's car, Collins' position, the trajectory of each bullet. Based on the evidence, Sergeant Collins was standing approximately 4 feet from Ms. Harris's driver's side door when he fired. He had clear visibility of the interior of the vehicle. Ms. Harris's hands were on the steering wheel, visible through the window. The angle of the shots indicates he was standing upright, not crouching defensively. His weapon was level, aimed center mass at a seated target. Is this consistent with defensive shooting? Absolutely not. Defensive shooting typically involves an officer seeking cover, firing while moving, shots scattered due to stress and movement. This was static shooting, carefully aimed, tight grouping. The shooter was calm enough to place all 4 shots in a 6-inch diameter. What does that tell you? It tells me this was an execution, that the victim survived through luck, not poor shooting. Reynolds manipulated the 3D model. If we overlay Ms. Harris's actual position from the crime scene photos, we can see that she was sitting normally. Seatbelt still fastened, hands visible. There was no weapon, no threatening movement, nothing that would justify lethal force under any police training protocol in the country. Burke's cross-examination focused on the technical aspects, trying to create doubt in the minutiae. But Reynolds was unshakable, his expertise too thorough to challenge effectively. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. The smartwatch recording played in its entirety for the jury. The courtroom fell silent as Nicole's voice filled the space, calm and professional even in the face of aggression. Collins's voice, growing louder, more hostile, demanding compliance without justification. The moment of shooting, Nicole's sharp intake of breath, glass breaking, her hitting the pavement. And then the words that sealed Collins's fate. You just shot a state prosecutor, Sergeant Collins, badge number 4739. I suggest you call your union rep immediately. The recording continued through the aftermath. Collins trying to intimidate Ryan Mitchell, Ryan's refusal to lie, Captain Rodriguez arriving, and finally, Collins' unguarded moment. She didn't act scared enough. People like her need to show respect. Maybe getting shot will teach her some humility. Several jury members visibly reacted to that phrase. People like her. The racism wasn't subtext anymore. It was text, captured and preserved. But Sarah Williams wasn't done. She introduced the signal chat records, reading selected messages aloud for the jury. Collins to the group. Another uppity prosecutor asking questions about the Thompson shooting. Need to teach these people their place. Another officer responding, Rodriguez handles that. He's got the captain's bars. He can close anything. Collins again. Black women think a law degree makes them equal. Time to remind them it doesn't. Message after message. Building a pattern of racial animus, celebration of violence, conspiracy to cover up civil rights violations. The jury looked at Collins with expressions that ranged from disgust to fury. On the fourth day, David Burke made a tactical decision that sealed his client's fate. He put Derek Collins on the stand. Sergeant Collins, tell the jury what happened on the night of September 15th. Collins straightened in his chair, trying to project authority. I observed a vehicle traveling on Highway 95. The driver appeared distracted, possibly impaired. I followed to observe driving patterns before initiating a traffic stop. Did you know the driver's race before pulling her over? No, sir, it was dark. I couldn't see into the vehicle clearly. Sarah Williams made a note. That was a lie. The security footage showed Collins following closely enough to see inside the car. What happened when you approached? The driver was argumentative immediately. She refused to provide documents, started asking questions instead of complying. Her behavior was consistent with someone trying to conceal something. Drugs, weapons, outstanding warrants. Did she make any threatening movements? Yes, she reached toward her center console area. In my training and experience, that's where weapons are commonly kept. I gave verbal commands to show her hands, but she continued reaching. I perceived an imminent deadly threat and responded with appropriate force. Sarah's cross-examination was surgical. Sergeant Collins, you testified you couldn't see the driver's race before pulling her over, but the security footage from Miller's gas station shows your patrol car directly behind Ms. Harris's vehicle at a stoplight, close enough to see the driver clearly. Were you lying just now, or were you mistaken? Collins' jaw tightened. I may have been able to see at the stoplight, but... So you did know she was black before you initiated the stop? I don't remember specifically. You don't remember if you could see the person you followed for 3 miles? Sarah's tone was sharp. Let me refresh your memory. You told Officer Mitchell, there's another one thinking she's above the law before you even turned on your lights. What did you mean by another one? Just another difficult driver. Another difficult driver? Or another black driver? Sarah pulled up Collins' text messages on the screen. Because your signal chat messages refer repeatedly to those people and uppity blacks and teaching respect. So when you said another one, you meant another black person who dared to exist in your jurisdiction, didn't you? I object to this characterization. Answer the question, Sergeant. Did you pull over Nicole Harris because she was black? The courtroom held its breath. I pulled her over because she was driving suspiciously, Collins insisted, but his voice carried less conviction now. She wasn't speeding, she wasn't weaving, she wasn't violating any traffic law, so what exactly was suspicious? Her race. No, it was her behavior. What behavior? Driving while black? Existing while black? Sarah's voice rose. You followed her for 3 miles without cause, pulled her over without justification, escalated to lethal force within 90 seconds, and shot her 4 times, because she had the audacity to ask why she was being stopped. And now you're asking this jury to believe that was good police work. I perceived a threat. You perceived a black woman who knew her rights and didn't show you sufficient deference. Sarah pulled up the smartwatch recording transcript. She said, Officer, my phone is in my jacket pocket. I'm going to reach for it slowly to call my attorney. That's not a threat. That's someone announcing their movements exactly as officers are trained to do, but you shot her anyway. Why? Collins's face flushed red. She was non-compliant. She was argumentative. People like her think... He stopped, realizing what he'd just said. People like her? Sarah repeated slowly. People like her, Sergeant Collins. Black women. Prosecutors. People who know their constitutional rights. Which people were you referring to? The silence was deafening. People who don't respect authority, Collins finally said, but the damage was done. Authority or authoritarianism? Sarah asked quietly. Because authority in America comes from the Constitution, which guarantees citizens the right to ask questions of law enforcement. Miss Harris exercised that right, and you attempted to execute her for it. That's not authority, Sergeant, that's tyranny. Burke tried to salvage the situation on redirect, but Collins was rattled. He'd confessed on the stand to exactly what the prosecution had alleged: racial bias leading to attempted murder. The jury saw a man who believed his badge gave him the power of life and death over anyone who didn't show sufficient submission. They saw 20 years of unchecked authority corroding into racism and violence. They saw a killer in a uniform, and they saw justice demanding accountability. Those 7 words, "People like her need to show respect," would become the most quoted phrase in civil rights law for the next decade. Derek Collins had just confessed to racially motivated attempted murder on national television. And sitting in the gallery, the families of Marcus Thompson, Darius Williams, and Jamal Henderson finally had the validation they'd been denied for years. The prosecution's final week focused not just on Collins, but on the system that created and protected him. Special Agent Marcus Johnson took the stand with boxes of evidence representing months of FBI investigation. Agent Johnson, your investigation extended beyond Sergeant Collins, correct? Yes, ma'am. We investigated the entire department's pattern and practice regarding use of force, particularly in encounters with African American citizens. What did you find? Johnson pulled up statistics that made the jury lean forward. Over a 5-year period, the department had 47 officer-involved shootings. 39 of those involved black victims, despite black residents comprising only 18% of the city's population. 23 of those shootings were ruled justified without meaningful investigation. 15 involved officers who had multiple prior shootings, yet faced no additional scrutiny or retraining. Did you find evidence of systemic cover-ups? Extensive evidence. Johnson displayed internal emails. These communications show Captain Rodriguez and other command staff actively suppressing complaints, closing investigations without proper review, and protecting officers with documented patterns of excessive force. One email from Rodriguez to a deputy chief. Collins had another shooting. Same situation as last time. I'll handle the paperwork. We can't afford another scandal right now. Another from Rodriguez to Collins. Internal Affairs is asking questions about the Henderson case. Stick to your statement. I've got your back. The jury saw a pattern of institutional corruption that went far beyond one officer. They saw a department that valued loyalty over justice, that protected bad cops instead of removing them, that treated civil rights complaints as public relations problems rather than criminal violations. Gloria Thompson took the stand, Marcus Thompson's mother, holding a photo of her son in his high school graduation cap and gown. Miss Thompson, tell the jury about your son. Marcus was 24 when Sergeant Collins killed him. Her voice shook but remained strong. He was studying nursing at community college. He worked 2 jobs to pay for it. He wanted to help people. She looked directly at Collins. He was pulled over for a broken tail light. He asked why he was being stopped, and Derek Collins shot him in the chest and left him to die on the side of the road. What did the police tell you about what happened? They said Marcus reached for something, that he was non-compliant, that the shooting was justified and no charges would be filed. Gloria's tears fell freely now. They told me my son was a threat. But when I heard the recording of what Collins did to Prosecutor Harris, I realized they told me the same lies. My son didn't reach for anything. He was executed for being black and asking a question. Did you ever see the dash cam footage from Marcus's stop? No. They said there was a technical malfunction. The camera didn't record. Gloria's voice hardened. But that was a lie, too. Wasn't it? The FBI recovered the footage. It showed exactly what I said. My son complying, his hands visible, begging not to be shot. And Collins shot him anyway. The recovered footage played on the courtroom screens. Marcus Thompson, hands on the steering wheel, voice cracking with fear. Officer, please, I'm complying. My hands are right here. Please don't shoot me. Collins' voice. You should have thought of that before you disrespected me. A single gunshot. Marcus slumping forward. Collins calmly radioing in. Shots fired. Suspect made threatening movements. Send backup. Several jury members wiped tears. The defense table was silent. Darius Williams' widow, Keisha Williams, testified next. My husband was a high school teacher. He was washing his car in our driveway when Collins and another officer pulled up, guns drawn, shouting commands. Darius was confused. We live in a good neighborhood. He hadn't done anything wrong. He asked what was happening. Collins shot him 3 times while our 6-year-old daughter watched from the living room window. What reason did they give for approaching your husband? They said there had been burglaries in the area, and Darius matched the description of a suspect. Keisha's voice dripped with bitter irony. The description was black male, mid-30s. That described half the men in our neighborhood. But it was enough for Collins to decide my husband deserved to die. The FBI had recovered body cam footage of that shooting too. Darius Williams, shirtless, holding a sponge and a water hose, asking repeatedly what was happening. Collins's escalation from 0 to lethal in under 30 seconds. The shooting, the cover-up, Rodriguez arriving and immediately beginning to coach Collins on his statement. Jamal Henderson's grandmother, who'd raised him after his parents died, testified through sobs. Jamal was 19. He was buying snacks at a convenience store when Collins pulled into the parking lot. Jamal walked out with his hands full, chips, soda, candy bars, and Collins ordered him to show his hands. Jamal said, "They're right here, sir. I'm just carrying food." Collins shot him twice. My grandson died clutching a Snickers bar. The pattern was undeniable. 3 young black men, all killed for asking questions or appearing insufficiently subservient. 3 families destroyed. 3 cover-ups orchestrated by Captain Rodriguez and approved by command staff who cared more about avoiding lawsuits than preventing murders. The FBI's investigation had uncovered $23 million in secret settlement payments over 5 years. Hush money paid to families of police shooting victims in exchange for signing non-disclosure agreements. The city had essentially been paying off families to keep Collins' killing spree quiet. Agent Johnson, in your professional opinion, was Sergeant Collins a bad apple acting alone, or was he a product of systemic failures? He was both, Johnson said carefully. Collins is responsible for his own actions. He pulled the triggers. He made the choices to escalate, to shoot, to cover up. But the system enabled him. It trained him to see black citizens as threats. It protected him when he used excessive force. It promoted him despite mounting evidence of racial bias. It paid off his victims' families rather than removing him from the streets. Derek Collins is guilty, but the system that created Derek Collins is guilty too. The defense had no effective counter to this avalanche of evidence. Burke tried to argue that each shooting was reviewed and found justified at the time, that hindsight bias was coloring the perception of split-second decisions, that Collins was being scapegoated for broader social problems. But the jury had seen the footage. They'd heard the victims' families. They'd seen the emails showing deliberate cover-ups. They'd heard Collins himself admit on the stand that people like her needed to be taught respect. Captain James Rodriguez testified under immunity, having taken a plea deal in exchange for truthful testimony about the department's practices. Captain Rodriguez, how many complaints of excessive force did you receive about Sergeant Collins over his 20-year career? Rodriguez looked at his hands. 47 formal complaints, approximately 200 informal complaints that never became official. And how many of those complaints resulted in disciplinary action against Sergeant Collins? None. Why not? Because I closed them. Rodriguez's voice was barely audible. I determined them to be unfounded or unprovable. I believed Collins when he said the complainants were lying to get out of arrests or to sue the city. I believed him because he was my officer, my friend, and I wanted to believe him. Even after the 3rd shooting? Especially after the 3rd shooting. By then, if I admitted Collins was a problem, I'd have to admit I'd been enabling him for years, so I doubled down. I covered for him. I falsified reports. I intimidated witnesses. I became everything I swore I'd never be when I put on this badge. Rodriguez looked at the families in the gallery. I'm sorry, those words don't bring your sons and husbands back, but I'm sorry. I failed them. I failed this city. I failed everything this uniform is supposed to represent. The prosecution rested. The evidence was overwhelming. Video, audio, forensics, pattern evidence, testimony from victims' families, admissions of systemic corruption. Derek Collins wasn't just a murderer. He was the product of a system designed to protect him, even as he killed. Burke's defense was brief. He called a use-of-force expert, who testified that officer-involved shootings are chaotic and that Collins' actions could be seen as reasonable in the moment. He called character witnesses who described Collins as a dedicated officer and family man. He tried to humanize a monster. It didn't work. The department's own internal emails would prove their biggest mistake. They'd been warned about Derek Collins 7 years ago by a police psychologist who evaluated him after the first shooting. The evaluation recommended immediate removal from patrol and mandatory counseling. Captain Rodriguez had filed the report in a drawer and promoted Collins to sergeant instead. The closing arguments took place on a Friday morning, 8 weeks after the trial began. The courtroom was packed with media, victims' families, police officers on both sides of the issue, and citizens who'd followed every moment. Sarah Williams approached the jury box with quiet intensity. "Ladies and gentlemen, this trial has been about many things. Justice for Nicole Harris, who survived 4 bullets that should have killed her. Justice for Marcus Thompson, Darius Williams, and Jamal Henderson, who didn't survive. But more than anything, this trial has been about a simple question. Are police officers above the law?" She paused, letting the question hang. Derek Collins believed he was above the law. For 20 years, he acted with impunity. He stopped citizens without cause. He escalated encounters without justification. He used excessive force without consequence. And when his victims dared to question him, when they dared to assert their constitutional rights, he executed them. Sarah walked along the jury box, making eye contact with each member. "The defense wants you to believe this was about split-second decisions in dangerous situations. But the evidence shows something different. Collins followed Nicole Harris for 3 miles, waiting for any excuse to pull her over. When he approached her vehicle, he was aggressive from the first word. When she asked why she'd been stopped, a question every American has the constitutional right to ask, he saw that question as a threat requiring lethal force. She clicked the remote, displaying the bullet holes in Nicole's car door. 4 shots, center mass, aimed to kill. Fired at an unarmed woman who was complying with commands. That's not police work, that's attempted murder. And the only reason Nicole Harris is alive to see justice today is because Derek Collins's aim was slightly off. Sarah pulled up Collins's text messages on the screen. "But don't take my word for it. Listen to Derek Collins' own words. People like her need to show respect. Uppity blacks thinking they're equal. Time to teach them their place. These aren't the words of an officer protecting the community. These are the words of a racist who used his badge as a license to kill." She turned to face Collins directly. "You shot Nicole Harris because she was black and educated and refused to be intimidated by your badge. You shot her because, in your worldview, black citizens don't have the right to ask questions of white officers. You shot her because 20 years of unchecked authority convinced you that your badge made you judge, jury, and executioner." Sarah walked back to the prosecution table, placing her hand on Nicole's shoulder. But Nicole Harris survived, and her survival means Derek Collins finally has to answer for his crimes. Not just the attempted murder of a prosecutor, but the murders of 3 young black men whose families were told their sons' deaths were justified. This verdict isn't just about Derek Collins. It's about whether we as a society accept that black lives matter, that constitutional rights matter, that no badge gives anyone the right to execute citizens for asking questions. She faced the jury one final time. Find Derek Collins guilty, because he is guilty, of attempted murder, of civil rights violations, of obstruction of justice. Find him guilty and send a message that in America, no one, not even a police officer, is above the law. Sarah Williams sat down to absolute silence. The weight of 8 weeks of testimony hung in the air like smoke. David Burke stood for his closing argument, and he looked tired. Defending Collins had aged him visibly over the course of the trial. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to stand here and tell you Derek Collins is perfect. He's not. He made mistakes. He used poor judgment. But making mistakes and using poor judgment isn't the same as attempted murder. It isn't the same as being a racist monster who hunts black citizens. Burke walked toward the jury, his tone almost pleading. Derek Collins was a police officer for 20 years. He responded to thousands of calls. He helped hundreds of citizens. He worked holidays and weekends. He missed his kids' birthdays to keep this city safe, and yes, he was involved in shootings. But that's because police work is dangerous, not because he's a murderer. He pulled up crime statistics on the screen. This city has a violent crime problem. Officers like Derek Collins face armed suspects, drug dealers, gang members who don't hesitate to shoot first. They make split-second decisions with incomplete information, and sometimes those decisions are wrong. But being wrong isn't being criminal. Burke's voice rose with passion. The prosecution wants you to believe this was about racism, but where's the proof? Yes, Collins sent inappropriate text messages in a private chat. Yes, he used poor language, but inappropriate language isn't attempted murder. It's distasteful, it's unprofessional, but it's not criminal. He pointed toward Nicole. Ms. Harris was argumentative during the traffic stop. She questioned commands instead of complying. She reached toward an area of her vehicle where weapons are commonly concealed, and in that moment, Derek Collins, a trained officer with 2 decades of experience, perceived a threat and responded. Was he wrong? Yes. Does that make him a murderer? No. Burke's closing was passionate but hollow. The evidence was too strong, Collins's own words too damning, the pattern too clear. Judge Morrison gave jury instructions that took 90 minutes, the legal standards for attempted murder, for civil rights violations, for obstruction of justice, the burden of proof, the requirement of unanimity. The jury listened with intense focus, taking notes, asking clarifying questions. At 2:47 p.m. on a Friday afternoon, the jury retired to deliberate. Nicole sat in the courthouse cafeteria with Sarah Williams, drinking coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. Her shoulder ached. It always ached when she was stressed, but she refused pain medication until after the verdict. She needed to be clear-headed for whatever came next. How long do you think? Nicole asked. Could be hours. Could be days. Sarah squeezed her hand. The evidence is overwhelming, but juries are unpredictable, especially when a police officer is the defendant. They'll convict, Nicole said with quiet certainty. They saw his face when he said, people like her. They heard the victims' families, they saw the pattern, they'll convict. At 5:13 p.m., 3 hours after deliberations began, the jury sent a note to Judge Morrison. We have reached a verdict. The courtroom filled within minutes. News cameras, victims' families, police officers, protesters, all crowding into the gallery. Nicole walked to the prosecution table with her head high, her arm still slightly favoring the shoulder that would never fully heal. Collins stood at the defense table, his face pale but composed. He'd maintained his innocence throughout the trial, convinced that the jury would see him as a dedicated officer rather than a murderer. He was about to learn how wrong he was. Has the jury reached a verdict? Judge Morrison asked. The jury foreman, a 53-year-old engineer named David Martinez, stood. We have, Your Honor. On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree. How do you find? Martinez looked directly at Collins. Guilty. The courtroom erupted. Collins' face went white. Burke closed his eyes. Nicole felt Sarah's hand grip hers so tight it hurt. Order. Morrison's gavel cracked like gunfire. I will have order in this courtroom. The noise subsided to whispers and muffled sobs. On the charges of civil rights violations, counts 1 through 4. How do you find? Guilty on all counts. On the charge of obstruction of justice, how do you find? Guilty. On the charges of evidence tampering, witness intimidation, and conspiracy to violate civil rights, how do you find? Guilty on all counts, Your Honor. 17 guilty verdicts. Every single charge. Complete conviction. Gloria Thompson sobbed in the gallery, holding the photo of Marcus. Keisha Williams wrapped her arms around Jamal Henderson's grandmother, Ryan Mitchell, sitting in the back row in his FBI trainee uniform, wiped tears from his face. Collins stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. 20 years of getting away with murder, of being protected by the system, of believing his badge made him invincible. And it had all crumbled in 3 hours of jury deliberation. Judge Morrison's voice cut through the emotion. "Mr. Collins, you have been found guilty on all charges by a jury of your peers. Sentencing will be scheduled for 30 days from today. Until that time, you are remanded to custody without bail. Bailiff, take him into custody." 2 bailiffs approached Collins. And the reality finally hit him. He was going to prison, not administrative leave, not early retirement with pension. Prison. As the bailiffs placed handcuffs on his wrists, the same handcuffs he'd placed on hundreds of citizens over 20 years, Collins looked at Nicole. She met his eyes steadily, her expression neither triumphant nor vindictive, just resolved. "You destroyed me," Collins said, his voice breaking. "No," Nicole replied quietly. "You destroyed yourself. I just made sure everyone could see it." The bailiffs led Collins away, and for the first time in 2 decades, he experienced what his victims had felt, the helplessness of being in custody, the fear of an uncertain future, the realization that the system he'd relied on to protect him had finally failed. Outside the courthouse, the press conference was chaotic. Reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing, protesters celebrating and grieving in equal measure. Nicole stood at the podium, her voice steady despite the exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm her. Today, a jury of 12 citizens looked at the evidence and determined that Derek Collins is guilty of attempted murder and multiple civil rights violations. This verdict brings a measure of justice for me, but more importantly, it brings vindication for the families of Marcus Thompson, Darius Williams, and Jamal Henderson, 3 young men who Derek Collins murdered and whose deaths were covered up by a corrupt system. She paused, gathering strength. But one conviction doesn't fix a broken system. Derek Collins was enabled by supervisors who ignored complaints, by fellow officers who helped him cover up crimes, by a department that valued protecting its own over serving the community. The verdict today says Derek Collins is guilty, but the work of reform is just beginning. Gloria Thompson stepped to the microphone, her voice strong through her tears. "My son has been gone for 3 years. 3 years of wondering if the police were telling the truth, if Marcus really did something wrong, if I failed him somehow as a mother. Today I learned that I didn't fail him. The system failed him. Derek Collins murdered him, and Captain Rodriguez helped hide it. But now everyone knows the truth. Marcus Thompson was executed for being black and asking questions, and the men who killed him are finally being held accountable." The press conference lasted 45 minutes, victims' families speaking, Sarah Williams explaining the legal implications, Agent Johnson discussing the ongoing federal investigation into the entire department. And through it all, Nicole Harris stood as a symbol of something powerful, not just survival, but transformation. She'd been shot 4 times and had turned her near death into a catalyst for systemic change. But Nicole Harris wasn't satisfied with just convicting Derek Collins. She wanted to make sure this could never happen again, and the sentencing hearing in 30 days would be her platform to demand reforms that would reshape policing across the entire nation. 30 days after the guilty verdict, Derek Collins stood before Judge Morrison for sentencing. He'd aged a decade in a month. The orange jumpsuit hung loose on his frame, his face was gaunt, his eyes hollow. Prison was not kind to former police officers, and Collins had learned that lesson quickly and brutally. "Mr. Collins, you have been found guilty of 17 charges, including attempted murder, civil rights violations, and obstruction of justice. Before I impose sentence, do you have anything to say?" Collins stood, his lawyer beside him, and for a moment it seemed he might finally show remorse. But old habits die hard. "Your Honor, I spent 20 years protecting this community. I faced dangers most people can't imagine. I made mistakes, but they were the mistakes of an officer trying to do his job in impossible circumstances. I don't believe I deserve to be punished like a common criminal." Judge Morrison's expression didn't change, but her eyes hardened. "Sit down, Mr. Collins. You had your chance to show remorse, and you chose to show arrogance instead. She pulled out a stack of papers, victim impact statements that had been submitted for the sentencing hearing. I'm going to read selections from these statements because I want you to understand the full scope of the harm you've caused. Morrison began with Gloria Thompson's statement. My son Marcus was my everything. He was studying to be a nurse because he wanted to help people. He called me every Sunday. He brought me flowers on Mother's Day. And Derek Collins shot him in the chest for asking why he'd been pulled over. I will never hold my grandchildren because Marcus will never have children. I will never see him graduate college. I will never walk him down the aisle. Derek Collins didn't just kill my son, he killed my future. Collins stared at the table, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. Morrison continued with Keisha Williams' statement. My daughter was 6 years old when she watched Derek Collins murder her father in our driveway. She saw her daddy washing the car, and then she saw him fall down and not get up. She's 9 now, and she still has nightmares. She still asks me when daddy is coming home. She doesn't trust police officers. She doesn't trust anyone in uniform. Derek Collins didn't just kill my husband. He traumatized my child for life. The courtroom was silent, except for Morrison's voice reading statement after statement. Jamal Henderson's grandmother, describing how she'd raised her grandson after his parents died, only to have Collins take him away. Ryan Mitchell describing the moral injury of watching his training officer commit murder and being expected to lie about it. Dr. Chen describing her horror at treating wounds that should have been fatal, knowing they were inflicted by someone sworn to protect. Finally, Morrison read Nicole's statement. Derek Collins shot me 4 times because I asked questions. He shot me because I'm black and educated and refused to be intimidated. He shot me because in his worldview, people like me don't have the right to question authority. But I'm not here to talk about what he did to me. I'm here to talk about what we're going to do to make sure it never happens again. Morrison looked up from the paper to Nicole, sitting in the front row. Ms. Harris, would you like to deliver your statement in person? Nicole stood, walked to the witness stand and faced Collins directly. I'm alive because your aim was off by inches. Marcus Thompson isn't. Darius Williams isn't. Jamal Henderson isn't. 3 young men are dead because you believed your badge gave you the right to execute anyone who didn't show sufficient deference. Her voice was steady, controlled fury. You spent 20 years hiding behind that badge, protected by supervisors who cared more about avoiding lawsuits than preventing murders. You thought you were untouchable. You thought you'd get away with shooting me just like you got away with shooting them. Nicole leaned forward. But I survived, and my survival means all your crimes are exposed. The families you destroyed finally have answers. The system that protected you is being dismantled, and you're going to spend the rest of your life in prison experiencing the same helplessness your victims felt. She stood, preparing to leave the stand, then turned back. I don't forgive you, Derek Collins. I don't wish you peace. But I do thank you for one thing. Shooting me gave me the platform to make sure no other prosecutor, no other citizen, has to survive 4 bullets to prove that Black Lives Matter and constitutional rights matter. Your attempt to kill me became the catalyst for reform you spent 20 years trying to prevent. Nicole sat down and Judge Morrison took a long breath. Mr. Collins, I've been a judge for 30 years. I've sentenced murderers, rapists, child abusers, the worst humanity has to offer. But your crimes are unique in their betrayal of public trust. You were given a badge and a gun and the authority to protect citizens, and you used that authority to terrorize and murder the very people you swore to serve. Morrison's voice grew harder. You showed no remorse. You expressed no understanding of the harm you caused. Even now, at sentencing, you see yourself as the victim of political persecution rather than a murderer facing justice. That tells me you learned nothing from this trial and would do it all again if given the chance. She looked down at her sentencing guidelines. On the charge of attempted murder in the 1st degree, I sentence you to 25 years in state prison. On each count of civil rights violations, I sentence you to 10 years to run consecutively. On obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, and witness intimidation, I sentence you to 5 years on each count, also consecutive. Collins' lawyer was doing rapid math, his face growing paler with each number. Your total sentence is 65 years in state prison. You will be eligible for parole after serving 85%, which means you will serve at minimum 55 years. You are 45 years old, Mr. Collins. You will die in prison." Morrison's gavel fell with finality. "Furthermore, I am ordering the immediate termination of your law enforcement pension and benefits. The citizens of this city should not be required to fund your retirement after you spent 20 years terrorizing them." Collins slumped in his chair, the reality finally breaking through his denial. 65 years. He'd die in prison, probably from violence by inmates who hated cops, and there would be no pension waiting for his family. "Bailiff, remove the defendant." As Collins was led away, Nicole stood and walked to the families of his victims. They embraced, crying together, not tears of joy, because nothing could bring back their loved ones, but tears of relief that justice had finally come. Outside the courthouse, Nicole held a press conference that would change the national conversation about policing. "Derek Collins is going to prison for the rest of his life, and that's appropriate. But one officer in prison doesn't fix a system that created and protected him for 2 decades. That's why I'm announcing the Harris Protocol, a comprehensive reform package that I'll be introducing to the state legislature next month." She pulled out a thick document. "The Harris Protocol requires mandatory body cams that cannot be turned off or deleted by officers, independent review of all use of force incidents by civilian boards, a searchable national database of officer misconduct, so bad cops can't just move to a new department, elimination of qualified immunity for civil rights violations, and most importantly, a requirement that all traffic stops begin with the officer clearly stating the reason for the stop before making any demands." The press erupted with questions, but Nicole continued. "Derek Collins followed me for 3 miles without cause, pulled me over without justification, and shot me for asking questions. The Harris Protocol makes that illegal. It requires reasonable suspicion before initiating a stop. It requires de-escalation training. It requires officers to treat citizens with dignity and respect." She looked directly into the cameras. 23 states have already expressed interest in adopting the Harris Protocol. Police unions are opposing it because they claim it will make officers hesitant to do their jobs. But if your job requires you to violate constitutional rights and execute unarmed citizens, then yes, you should be hesitant. You should be fired. And if you cross the line into criminality, you should be in prison. The reforms moved quickly through the legislature. The conviction of Collins, combined with Nicole's compelling testimony about her near-death experience, created political momentum that was impossible to resist. Within 6 months, the Harris Protocol was signed into law. Within a year, 23 states had adopted versions of it. Within 5 years, it would become the model for federal police reform. Derek Collins's legacy wasn't the 3 men he murdered and the prosecutor he tried to kill. His legacy was the transformation of policing that his crimes made necessary. The Harris Protocol would go on to be adopted by 23 states. But its most important provision was something Nicole had learned the hard way. Every traffic stop would now require officers to state the specific violation before making any demands. Asking questions isn't resistance, it's citizenship. And no badge gives anyone the right to respond to questions with bullets. 6 months after Derek Collins was sentenced, Nicole Harris stood in front of the new Officer Accountability Training Center, a facility funded by the $15 million settlement the city had paid her in the civil suit. The building was modern, glass and steel, with the names of Marcus Thompson, Darius Williams, and Jamal Henderson engraved in granite at the entrance. Inside, officers from across the state would undergo mandatory anti-bias training, de-escalation tactics, and constitutional rights education. This center exists because 3 young men died, and I nearly died, Nicole told the assembled crowd at the ribbon-cutting ceremony. But its purpose is to make sure no one else has to die for police officers to learn that black citizens have constitutional rights. Governor Rachel Morrison, no relation to Judge Morrison, though they'd become allies in the reform movement, stood beside Nicole. The Harris Protocol and this training center represent the most comprehensive police reform in our state's history. But they wouldn't exist without Nicole Harris's courage, not just in surviving 4 bullets, but in turning her trauma into transformation. The first class of officers filed into the center, among them Ryan Mitchell, now a full FBI agent specializing in civil rights investigations. "Agent Mitchell," a reporter called out, "you were there when Prosecutor Harris was shot. How do you feel being part of this training center?" Ryan approached the microphone, his FBI credentials visible on his belt. "I was there, and I did nothing to stop it. I heard Derek Collins make a racist comment before pulling over Ms. Harris. I saw him escalate without cause. I watched him shoot an unarmed woman 4 times. And I almost lied to protect him, because that's what I'd been trained to do. Protect the badge above everything else." His voice strengthened. "This center teaches officers what I wish I'd been taught from day one, that good policing means protecting citizens, even when those citizens are questioning you. It means de-escalating instead of dominating. It means treating every traffic stop as an opportunity to build community trust, not as a potential battle." The training center's curriculum was revolutionary. Instead of warrior training that taught officers to see citizens as potential threats, it emphasized guardian training. Officers as protectors of constitutional rights first, enforcers second. Role-playing scenarios where officers practiced de-escalation, where asking questions was treated as normal rather than threatening, where cultural competency was as important as tactical training. Dr. Patricia Chen served as medical director, teaching officers about implicit bias in use of force decisions. "Your brain processes threats differently based on the race of the person you're encountering," she told a class of recruits. "Studies show officers perceive black citizens as larger, stronger, and more dangerous than white citizens of identical size. That bias gets people killed. This training is about recognizing and overcoming that bias." The impact was measurable and immediate. In the 6 months since the Harris Protocol and Training Center launched, officer-involved shootings in the state dropped by 67%. Use of force complaints fell by 53%. Community trust in police, measured by independent surveys, rose for the first time in a decade. But the transformation went beyond statistics. It was visible in individual encounters. Officers taking time to explain why stops were initiated, citizens asking questions without fear, de-escalation working where violence used to be the default. Nicole returned to work as a prosecutor, though her role had evolved. She now specialized in police misconduct cases, working with the FBI and Department of Justice to investigate departments with patterns of civil rights violations. She'd become the nation's leading expert on reforming corrupt police departments, testifying before Congress, advising governors, training prosecutors. The families of Collins' victims found their own paths to healing. Gloria Thompson started a foundation in Marcus's name, providing scholarships for young people pursuing careers in healthcare. Keisha Williams became an advocate for children traumatized by police violence, developing therapy programs and support groups. Jamal Henderson's grandmother worked with the ACLU to push for national reform. Derek Collins, meanwhile, experienced the reality of prison life for former police officers. He'd been attacked twice in the first month, spending 3 weeks in the infirmary. He'd been placed in protective custody, which meant 23 hours a day in a cell, isolated from other inmates for his own safety. The arrogance had been beaten out of him, literally and figuratively. His appeals were denied at every level. The evidence was too strong, the jury instructions proper, the sentence within guidelines. He would serve 55 years minimum, and everyone knew he wouldn't survive that long. Prison had a way of dispensing its own justice to cops who killed. Captain James Rodriguez, who'd pleaded guilty to obstruction of justice, served 7 years and was released on parole. He'd lost his pension, his reputation, his career. He now worked as a consultant for police reform organizations. His testimony about how good officers become complicit in corruption, serving as a warning to others. "I told myself I was protecting my officers," Rodriguez said in a documentary about the case, "but I was really protecting criminals with badges, and by the time I realized what I'd become, 3 young men were dead and a prosecutor had been shot 4 times. That's my legacy. Not 25 years of service, but the murders I enabled by looking the other way." On the 1-year anniversary of the shooting, Nicole stood on the highway shoulder where Collins had shot her. A memorial had been erected, 4 pillars representing the 4 bullets, with plaques bearing the names of all Collins' victims. The press had gathered, expecting a speech about justice or reform. But Nicole's message was simpler and more profound. I stand here today because Derek Collins' aim was off by inches. Marcus Thompson, Darius Williams, and Jamal Henderson aren't standing here because his aim was true when he shot them. That's the difference between me and them. Not courage, not virtue, just inches and luck. She touched the memorial. I don't want to be remembered as the prosecutor who survived. I want to be remembered as the prosecutor who made sure no one else had to be this lucky. The Harris Protocol, the training center, the reforms, those are the legacy that matters. Not my survival, but the lives saved because my survival forced change. Nicole looked at the families gathered around the memorial. Marcus, Darius, and Jamal deserved to live. They deserved to grow old, to have families, to pursue their dreams. Derek Collins took that from them, and nothing I do will ever bring them back. But I can make sure their deaths meant something. I can make sure they're the last victims of an officer who believed his badge gave him the right to execute citizens for asking questions. She pulled out her phone and held it up. I still have the smartwatch recording. I listen to it sometimes when I'm tempted to give up on reform, when the police unions fight back, when politicians prioritize cop votes over constitutional rights. I listen to my own voice asking why I was pulled over. I hear Collins's aggression. I hear the shots. And I remember that this fight isn't about me. It's about every citizen who should be able to ask questions without risking their life. The ceremony concluded with a moment of silence, and then Nicole did something unexpected. She invited the families to join her for dinner. Not a formal event, but a casual gathering where they could remember their loved ones as people, not victims. They told stories. Gloria described Marcus as a child. His determination to become a nurse, his kindness to elderly patients during his clinical rotations. Keisha shared memories of Darius coaching Little League, his terrible jokes, the way he danced in the kitchen while making breakfast. Jamal's grandmother laughed through tears, remembering his obsession with superhero movies, his dream of working in animation. The healing wasn't complete. It never would be. But it was happening. And Derek Collins, sitting in a prison cell 800 miles away, would never know that his attempt to silence Nicole Harris had instead amplified the voices of everyone he'd ever victimized. Justice wasn't just the 65-year sentence. Justice was the transformation that sentence enabled. Justice was officers learning to see citizens as people deserving dignity rather than threats requiring domination. Justice was Nicole Harris turning 4 bullets into a blueprint for reform that would save countless lives. As the dinner wound down, Nicole raised a glass. To Marcus, Darius, and Jamal, may their memories be a blessing and a call to action. May we honor them not just with words, but with the work of building a justice system that actually delivers justice. The glasses clinked together, and in that moment, the circle was complete. From bullets to justice, from tragedy to transformation, from one woman's survival to a nation's reckoning with police violence and racial bias. Derek Collins had tried to kill Nicole Harris. Instead, he'd created the catalyst for his own destruction and the reformation of the system that had protected him. That was justice. That was accountability. That was what happened when one woman refused to let bullets silence the truth. Thank you to everyone who typed justice and shared your locations with us. Seeing this global community united for accountability and truth proves that justice is a universal human value. If this story moved you, please subscribe for more stories of courage triumphing over corruption. Until next time, remember that asking questions isn't resistance, it's citizenship. And no badge gives anyone the right to respond to questions with bullets.